in 1976, it took people of my mom's generation 5 to 6 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average priced home. That was the case in Canada. That was the case in Vancouver and BC and Ontario. If you flash forward now, it would take 14 years across the country, 18 in Ontario, 20 in BC, 22 in Toronto, and a whopping 26 in Vancouver.
Hi, I'm Tamara, and this is TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Hard work used to be enough to build a good life. Well, that's not always the truth anymore. Today's younger Canadians are squeezed by rising costs, stagnant wages, and growing climate risks. Dr. Paul Kershaw, founder of Generation Squeeze, believes it doesn't have to be this way. He's calling for a new kind of generational fairness, one that asks governments to invest in Canadians of all ages. Paul explains how we can all strive to be good ancestors for the generations that follow. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Secure, simplify, and easily monitor your home from anywhere using the Smart Home Security app. Visit telus.com/smarthome-security to learn more about Canada's most trusted security provider. Hi, Paul. It's really good to see you.
What a pleasure to join you.
So I found you when I read an article about, I think it was about waitlist, generation waitlist or whatever. I don't even know what it was called, but the title got me, the article got me, but then that middle part where you were interviewed really got me. And I thought, who is this guy? And what is Generation Squeeze? And I think we should just start there. What is Generation Squeeze?
So on the one hand, Generation Squeeze is an organization, and we like to say we're not just a think tank, we're a think and change tank, and we champion the idea of generational fairness so that we safeguard things that Canadians hold to be sacred, like a healthy childhood, a healthy home, a healthy retirement, a healthy planet. And if we do those things, then we can all leave a legacy of which we'll be proud. But Generation Squeeze is also the name for a phenomenon, an experience that younger Canadians are having. And at first we were creating that largely for millennials, but the damn experience has been going on for so darn long. It is absolutely capturing Generation Z as well. And what we mean by that is, look, if you're a young person in Canada today, you're effectively not having hard work pay off for you like it used to. You're going to go to post-secondary more. You're going to pay more for the privilege to land jobs that actually, after adjusting for inflation, pay you thousands of dollars less. They don't have generous pensions. They're less likely to have extended health benefits. And then you're going to be doing so in a housing market where the values of homes have gone up so much that it takes years and years and years more work to even dream about home ownership. And your consolation prize is lousy. It's rising rents, which makes it harder to save. And this is happening sort of as the economic vice grip that we're putting on to younger Canadians at a moment when they want to be having their kids. And so people delay, they delay having their kids. You can only delay so long because of our, the TikTok biological reality. At some point you need to start your families. And then things can get harder still because childcare is another rent or mortgage size payment. Parental leave means you're foregoing another rent size payment. And so that is the big challenge that people are facing individually. And our society is in adding to that with some public debts, both in terms of government deficits, which are large and growing, and also environmental debts, as we are sort of, really compromising the planet's life support systems. And I use that phrase, life support, because they're critical for the life and well-being of all of us, but younger people and future generations need that more than the rest of us. And that's what's being put in jeopardy for them for their entire lives.
Yeah.
So that's the low moment of the day. So that is the squeeze. I see your facial expression there. I'm like, shoot, Paul, you gotta
No, but Paul, this is important because everything you said it hits home. I think for anybody listening, that's reality. And it's easy for, older people to say, oh, well, they can figure it out when I'm gone, or, that's fine, or who cares about the provincial budget, or who cares about it's not a problem, whatever. But it's a huge problem.
It really is a huge problem. And When we were first developing the plan for Generation Squeeze, we were actually doing some communications research, like what should we call this problem? And one of the most obvious things was to say it's Generation Screwed. And actually, I hear some politicians picking that up more and more. And we explicitly resisted that because if you're screwed, there's no hope. If you're squeezed, you can squeeze back. You take that lemon and you make lemonade. I am joining your podcast today as someone who wants to turn lemons into lemonade, that we can take something that is not working right now and make it better. And we can safeguard the healthy retirements that our aging loved ones are counting on. We can safeguard their legacy for their kids and grandchildren. And by doing so, we will ensure hard work starts to pay off once again for younger folks in the way that it did for previous generations.
So, what is generational fairness? What is that?
Yeah, on the one hand, people have been writing about that for like millennia, but I don't have millennia to tell it to you. So I would say the following. Are we safeguarding things that really matter for those who follow, or are we taking too much of them and leaving less left over? I think generational fair is like, do we leave at least as much as we inherited? If I were to really try and boil it down. And so that's why I often talk in the language of extraction, and that what we're doing right now in Canada is over extracting from our kids and grandchildren. If you think in terms of the planet's health, this is where we talk about extraction the most. So whether it's the atmosphere's scarce ability to absorb carbon, we're using that too quickly. It's we're using too many of our forests, and so our forests aren't carbon sinks any longer. Now, actually, more often they're burning down and releasing more carbon in the air. We're polluting our water. We're putting too many pollutants into the ocean, and it's warming faster. So, like, we're over extracting from the life services that our planet gives. But there's also over extraction, I would argue, in our housing system. And here, so if you're not really climate oriented, you're like, oh, shut up, Paul. Let me give you one that I bet you I can get you to lean into with real concern, especially here in British Columbia. I'm 51. When I bought my home, it was about $1 million. At the time, it seemed friggin' crazy that anyone would have to spend that much on housing. But over the last 20 years, now my home's worth more than $1 million than I put into it. You should know it's older. I've used it. The floors are scratched now. The roof is older. I did a reno early on, but it's needing renos again. And yet it's more than $1 million more valuable. It's made me $1 million wealthier. But what's given me this windfall while I was watching television and cleaning my dishes and sleeping in the home that I bought as a home, it's now meaning that someone who's just as smart as me, just as hardworking as me, but they happen to be younger, or they're a newcomer of any age, they can't afford to live where I do. And so my ability to have extracted wealth out of my home is causing unaffordability for those who follow. And then the third example would be in fiscal policy. My mom's 81, and who doesn't want anything other than his mother to have a healthy retirement? And my mom's at a life course stage where she's going to be going into surgery soon. She has a kidney issue, and I'm delighted that our medical care system is there to give her that service. And we know that we use more medical care in particular later in our lives. People should know I'm a prof in the faculty of medicine. It's a biological reality. You're going to use more medical care as you grow older because there's a frailty that comes with that. The problem is that our governments didn't plan for the baby boom getting older. We called them we called them boomers because they were a big generation. And when boomers started out, there were about 7 working age Canadians to help subsidize the costs of healthy retirement for every retiree. But now that boomers have retired, and they're a large group, it means there's just 3 working age people to help subsidize the costs for them in retirement. At a moment when their care that they're using is going up exponentially. You'll use more care over the age of 65 than you will in your first 6.5 decades. Like, everyone over 65 is really equivalent to like 4 people under the age of 50 in our line for medical care. And so these things are creating huge pressures on our budgets. It's not my mom's fault that it's creating pressures. It's the fault of governments decades ago not planning adequately for boomers getting older. But right now it means when we produce new revenue from economic growth, the bulk of that is going to either old age security federally or medical care for boomers provincially at a scale that is much larger than what we're doing for, say, childcare or post-secondary or housing or fighting climate change or even national defense in this era where we have, the neighbors to the south saying maybe you should become the 51st state. And so it's a hard message right now to give to my mom's demographic. But not only is there over extraction from the planet's health and over extraction from our housing system, our use of tax dollars is actually over extracting for later in the life course at a moment when boomers are really counting on it, but at the cost of us leaving enough to invest urgently in their kids and grandchildren. And this, what parent or grandparent would sit around a family table? I guess we're coming up to Thanksgiving. And what parent or grandparent is going to sit around the Thanksgiving table and say, you know what? I really want to stick to my kids and grandchildren. I want to use all the resources that I have right now disproportionately for me at the expense of leaving less left over for my kids and grandchildren. Nobody talks that way. You might see a bumper sticker on somebody's car, I'm spending my children's inheritance. But really, it makes us giggle, and we also eye roll at that, right? Most parents and grandparents make sacrifices all the time for their kids and grandchildren. And our world of politics does the opposite right now. And that's what we need to change. So Gen Squeeze is on a mission to take the intergenerational love around the family table into the world of politics. And when we do so, that's how we get a country that works for young and old alike.
Yes, 100%. I love everything that you said. And I mean, and the way you shaped it into those different stories is very relatable for anyone listening, really. So, and of course, you've ignited dozens of questions in my brain. And so I'm quickly, scanning them all for where I should start, because I mean, the first thing is, how on earth do we ever, like, when I look at, government and politics, and to me, seems so much more volatile than ever before. Everything is political. Things that should not even be political are politicized. And so, we're losing track of what's important, which are the things that you so eloquently laid out. When we change government every 4 years, to me, it feels like Groundhog Day, and we're starting over again, even if it's the same government. And then they have to, reorganize everything, and new mandates and new offices, and everybody's moving, and I just see, and maybe it's because I'm getting older, I just see there's so much waste. There's wasted time, waste of resources, waste of taxpayer dollars at a rate that is, I can't even imagine how much money we could save if we just, did things, I don't know, I want to say properly, but just with a conscious mind that it's not your money, it's taxpayer money that we are all collectively giving you. And so I think what I'm trying to ask you is, how on earth do we hold any government accountable when it just seems to be changing, and it seems like there's less transparency than ever before?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to answer that question. And so the most straightforward way for me to still have your listeners like me is to say we can expect more of government, and we should. And there are opportunities for us to find the efficiency that you were describing. And we should do that. I would argue at the provincial level, that is especially in medical care. And bring me back another time, we can just talk about our medical care system specifically, because we have challenges in the way that we're just framing the issue.
So when you're talking to, younger groups of people, what do you say to them to encourage engagement and the need for us to all get in the boat and row in the same direction?
Yeah, I think a few things. One, I think a key moral of this story is that politics responds to those who organize and show up. And so inviting a younger demographic to show up effectively is critical. That partly means voting. And younger people over the age of 18 are eligible to vote, but don't show up at the ballot box in the same proportion as those who are older. That's partly because of the lack of hopefulness that you just described, but then it's a vicious cycle. If you don't show up, then those with the power are going to be less likely to organize their priorities around your priorities, because they need to cater to those who are showing up. It's a vicious circle. It's also, though, why I am a strong proponent for a great initiative called Vote 16. I absolutely think we should be reducing the age of eligibility to vote down to age 16. Some people have worried that, oh, well, then you'd have kids who are voting during their grade school years, and they could be very much influenced by their teachers. And we wouldn't want that to, we wouldn't want teachers to be influencing kids in ways around their vote. But then I'll tell the story about my grandmother who lived to the age of 103. And in her final 6 years, she lived in a care home where I was so delighted that in every election, they would bring the polling station to the care home to facilitate my grandmother to vote. In her final years, my grandmother had dementia. And one of the things that was interesting to observe is that as her dementia set in, her lifelong voting patterns changed. And it surprised me, but I would have defended till my last breath her right to go vote with, in accordance with what she was thinking was a priority at that time. And so, if we can bring a polling station into a care facility for a 100-year-old woman who has dementia and not be worried about how that care facility might be influencing her vote, then there's no doubt I think we can absolutely help a bunch of 16-year-olds better shape their future by making their vote count. I think the last thing I would say just to a younger demographic is we often talk about thinking global, acting local. I love that phrase, and it bugs me in terms of where power rests. So at the local level, municipalities have very little power, all things considered, in terms of government policy. They collect about maybe at most 9 cents on the tax dollar. They have some policy levers. It's not unimportant, but compared to provinces and the federal government, they have less power. If you think globally, well, things like the United Nations can't get Canada or France or Germany or especially the US to really do anything. They don't have a big enough levers. So where power really rests is at the senior levels of government in a nation state. And so for us in Canada, it's our federal government in Ottawa and in Victoria or Edmonton, Toronto, etc. And that's where it's become the least sexy part of the political conversation for many a younger person in my experience. And we need to make the decisions going on in Victoria and Ottawa of really significant import for young and old alike. So I love the phrase about think global, act local, but we need local to be, and I mean the head of our province and federal government too.
And this is a great time to point out that we like to thank our guests for being here by asking them to choose a Canadian registered charity. So you chose the Association for Generational Equity, which I'd never heard of before. And then now I find out that that's the charity arm, I guess, or the fundraising arm of Generation Squeeze. Is that correct? Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I wish you were the fundraising arm. We could really use more funds. We are on a shoestring budget trying to do big, bold things. So Generation Squeeze, I called it earlier a think and change tank, not just a think tank. And so I'm a university professor at UBC, and I run my lab there. The lab is the Gen Squeeze lab. And then we have a community partner called the Association for Generational Equity, or AGE, and that's our charity. And it has a range of colleagues small number of colleagues, who work with me to help bring the evidence from the lab to influence public policy decision-making in our provinces and at the federal level. And so if you're wondering, well, what does that mean? Well, if there's anybody out there who's taking advantage of $10 a day childcare, there was a whole ecosystem that has championed over half a century to improve childcare policy in this country. But the framing for a national childcare recommendation around $10 a day, that actually started in the Gen Squeeze lab and then was helped popularized by our charity AGE in combination with other actors in the sector, including Childcare Now, which is the national umbrella for childcare. Or if anyone's actually paid attention to national housing policy, you might be surprised that the first few drafts of the National Housing Strategy didn't identify young people as being vulnerable in our housing market. It did identify one group, seniors, as being vulnerable. And then we're like, well, did you know seniors have a very high home ownership rate? And they're especially likely to have benefited from rising home values. It doesn't seem very vulnerable by comparison with young people who are starting out. But it took them, the first draft, it wasn't there. The second draft, it wasn't there. By the third draft, we had young people added to the list of vulnerable groups. making them eligible for billions of dollars of subsidies from which they would have been precluded. We have made inroads on parental leave. We made inroads on getting new housing built when it's being resisted in communities. We have been working hard at trying to protect the planet's health in terms of reducing climate change. And that's the kind of stuff that if you just do the research in a lab, then the evidence stays largely in the university context because evidence alone doesn't win the day. Evidence has to compete for attention, increasingly with fake news and also for a range of other interest groups. And there are lobbies lobbying for all kinds of things. And there hadn't been a lobby for generational fairness to get it right for young and old alike. That's the role that we're playing in our charity. Age isn't we don't really tend to brand the charity. We call it Generation Squeeze in its entirety, the lab and the charity together. That's what we want people to know about. And it's together we can bring the evidence and the person power to help change the incentives to which politicians respond.
I love it. Well, we are making a contribution as a thank you for you being here. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for explaining it. You know, it, to go back to the housing thing for a second, because I mean, you and I we would need like a 3-part series to talk about housing, especially here in British Columbia. We should do it. But, I think a big part of the problem is so many people look at everything like pie, like there's only so much. So what do you say to people who are living in their house and maybe it has gone up $1 million? Some places have gone up more than $1 million, way more. And they're too scared of being taxed more or this or that, or they won't have enough to leave their kids or whatever it might be. How do we change their minds about what it looks like to be generationally fair?
Yes. Because we don't have the 3-part episode, let me try and pick one vignette that will help to illustrate it in a short way. The way in which we've allowed home prices to rise and rise and rise and leave earnings behind is at real risk of turning Canada from an imperfect meritocracy into an absolute landed aristocracy. And what I mean by that is, under the concept of a meritocracy, like if you work hard, in a reasonable amount of time, your hard work should bring a good home and reach for what hard work can earn. In the past, we thought that would be through homeownership disproportionately, but at the very least, it should be reached in terms of renting. And now both of those things are out of reach in terms of our earnings be able to cover the cost of housing, because you can be spending the best part of $3,000 on a 1-bedroom apartment in Metro Vancouver these days, which is making it difficult for lawyers to afford homes that have enough bedrooms for their 2 kids, let alone someone who's at the median earnings, let alone someone who's more working poor. So then people say, you know what? Well, the way we're going to hack that broken system is like, I'm an older person in Metro Vancouver who has gained some equity in my home, often a lot of equity, and I'm going to help my child out. So I'm going to maybe free up some of that equity to help them with a down payment, or I'll help them with their rent. And that sounds so beautiful. And as a gesture of intergenerational love within the family, it's a gorgeous thing. But at a societal level, it is a recipe for disaster, because it means then that our ability to actually cover our major costs of living has little to do with our hard work, our education, our time and talent, and everything to do with, am I related to someone who's come before me, who's gained enough equity that they can then share with me so that they can help me overcome this broken housing system? That's what an aristocracy does. And a landed aristocracy will use its land and privilege for its families. A meritocracy was supposed to not allow that to be the way Canada was built. So that is why we have to have an older demographic right now lean in and say, wow, I didn't realize Canada is expecting a lot of Gen Z and millennials. We expect them to absorb higher rents. We expect them to work years more at the prospect of saving a down payment on an average priced home. And by the way, that average priced home is no longer a house with a yard. It's like a condo with a balcony. And it really sucks to go send your kids to play out on the balcony rather than out on the street or in the yard, etc. But anyway, we expect them to do that. We expect, in many cases, give up on the dream of home ownership altogether. And you know why we expect that? Because that's what's required to ensure home values don't fall too much. And politicians fear a fall in housing prices, given what that will do for those who are homeowners who have banked on the wealth that they've gained. And so we are asking a younger demographic to protect the improved standard of living of an older generation, to protect the wealth they've gained as an older generation through rising home values, but to do so by having to sacrifice themselves. They have to sacrifice their standard of living by having to pay more rent for less secure housing, for less, the housing's not close to where they work or study, it doesn't have enough rooms. And so we need an older demographic. They can't solve the problem on their own, but they have to have enough empathy to say, oh, I appreciate that millennials and Gen Z as generations are actually providing this unrecognized national service of protecting the housing wealth that I have gained by absorbing these higher costs. And is there a way that I can help signal my appreciation for that protection by potentially offering a bit of reciprocity? I'm not exactly sure what the reciprocity would look like. Maybe it would be some of the higher taxes you talked about, although talking taxes will get everybody angry. So it could be an idea that, is a more prominent part of Gen Squeeze work right now, where we ask financially secure retirees to take a little less of public subsidy. And it may surprise your listeners to know that you can be a retired couple with $180,000 of income, and you'll still get an $18,000 annual old age security subsidy. 180 grand of income, and I haven't even talked about you're likely a homeowner and so have all kinds of housing security there. But just based on that income, 180 grand, and you'll still get an 18 grand subsidy. By contrast, if you're family raising kids, you might get some Canada Child Benefit income support, but when your income goes above 80 grand, we'll claw it back. That difference in eligibility and generosity in terms of income supports for retirees is a place like, look, we could save billions of dollars as a country if we asked retirees with six-figure incomes to accept slightly less so that the savings can be repurposed to help other poor seniors, by the way, because we still have 400,000 poor seniors. We could eliminate that with the savings and still have money left over to improve housing and childcare and post-secondary for younger citizens. That's the kind of leaning in and reciprocity that I'm really asking at this stage, in particular baby boomers, because they're sort of the bulk of our retirees right now. That's the legacy you could leave if you recognize and appreciate that at the political level, we're expecting so much of young adults. Your kids and grandchildren's generations are being asked to sacrifice their standard of living to protect the home wealth you've gained. I understand why politics does it. I understand why you want your home wealth protected. I have a stake in that too. But I sure darn well appreciate those who are offering that protection, and I want to think about how I can contribute more back to them.
Wow. Yes. Wow. It takes bravery, though. And by bravery, I mean it takes a leader, a political leader, to say exactly what you said. And because what you're saying is not outrageous. What you're saying is not unattainable. You're not saying anything that is bananas. And so, but people don't want to hear what you're saying because it goes back to the pie, and that you don't deserve to take my pie because I worked hard for my pie. But what they don't see is how hard Gen Z and millennials are working. And they're working, it's not to belittle how hard the boomers worked or Gen X worked or whoever. It's not a competition about who worked harder. It's about we all deserve to to have access to healthcare, and this is why we pay taxes, and to have a roof over our heads that is safe and healthy, and to be able to put your kid in swim lessons if you want to, or get some daycare if you want to. Nobody's looking to become the next, billionaire here. We're just looking for basic human rights. Like, it's your right to have somewhere safe to lay your head in Canada at night and feel safe.
It's absolutely about those rights. And I think in Canada, though, one part of our cultural content is like rights imply responsibilities. And you use the language of hard work multiple times as you were sort of summarizing this part of our conversation. And that matters. I think Canadians are kind of people like, you get out what you put in. And that's a kind of, fairness is proportionality. If you're going to be a free rider, don't expect much. But if you're working hard, then you deserve to get a fair shake back. And so you nailed the description. Baby boomers worked hard. The reality that I'm pointing out is their hard work paid off more than hard work does today. It's not you didn't work hard, baby boomer. It's that recognize sometimes some eras reward hard work more than others. And we're in a context right now where hard work is not being rewarded to the same degree for millennials and Gen Z. And, some might snicker, like, oh, you mean for that generation where everyone gets an award for showing up and, all these people. So I'm like, no, the way you know that hard work doesn't pay off now is, in 1976, it took people of my mom's generation 5 to 6 years of full-time work to save a 20% down payment on an average priced home. That was the case in Canada. That was the case in Vancouver and BC and Ontario. If you flash forward now, it would take 14 years across the country, 18 in Ontario, 20 in BC, 22 in Toronto, and a whopping 26 in Vancouver. That is an example of hard work not paying off nearly as much as it used to. And we're just needing those for whom hard work paid off more in the past to just be aware of that and have that then shape our expectations and shape what we're willing to contribute back.
So what's your bright side? What is your bright side in all of this?
Thank you. What a lovely way to end a conversation. I think we're in a moment where our federal government and our provincial governments are priming us to expect austerity. And, we have some fiscal challenges. And so that might mean that I feel a sense of doom and gloom. But I feel my bright spot is that there is a way for us to expand our ambition in this moment of austerity. And I already highlighted for you a really a straightforward solution. Old age security is this policy that's now 1/5 of the federal budget, or nearly 1/5. Soon it's going to be $100 billion a year. And if we were to ask retirees with $100,000 or more of household income to accept slightly less, we could save $7 to $14 billion without raising taxes. That's enough to eliminate seniors' poverty, I should say. It's enough to eliminate seniors' poverty without raising taxes. And we could do that by the next budget. That's enough to then double the disability benefit and really help eliminate poverty for Canadians with disabilities. And it would still leave us the best part of $10 billion left over to think about how do we improve housing, childcare, and post-secondary. And there might be some money left over to even address the deficit. Now that gives me hope. I don't have to increase tax rates. I just want to better use dollars we're currently spending. And I want to ask people with 6-figure incomes to contribute in that mission. And the beautiful thing is, this is what's my bright spot, we literally have at Gen Squeeze retirees saying, I'm willing to accept less OAS so that we can eliminate seniors' poverty and help my kids and grandchildren. How could that not be a hopeful note to end on?
I love that. Yes. But honestly, Paul, you have changed my perspective, or maybe maybe you've changed my hope, I think, actually, on a lot of things. And there's great value in everything that you said. I really appreciate it. Your website is gensqueeze.ca. And like you said, I spent quite a bit of time on there the other day, and there's so much information there. So kudos to you and your team for putting together such an incredible space of information and for sharing your time with us today. I know we went long, but every word of this conversation means something to somebody. I guarantee that. So thank you very much for your time.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks for listening to another episode of TELUS Talks with Tamara Taggart. Be sure to subscribe so you can join us every Tuesday for another conversation. You can also check out our website, telus.com/podcast, and subscribe to our YouTube channel at TELUS Talks.